Welcome to today's deep dive. So, it is exactly 9 a.m. on April 13th, 2026.
Right.
And if you zoom in on Queen's Park in Toronto, you have Ontario's Minister of Education, Paul Calandra. He's slamming this massive piece of legislation onto the table.
Yeah, the Putting Student Achievement First Act.
Exactly.
Oh.
And we're talking about a sprawling, hyper-complex document. It's focused entirely on, structural reform, financial oversight, rigid targets.
Very top-down.
Very. But if you look just a few miles away, inside this totally chaotic grade 6 classroom, there's this unknown supply teacher.
Mr. Julian.
Yeah, Mr. Julian. And he is completely ignoring that massive reform. Instead, he picks up a single blank piece of paper, and he actually manages to achieve the exact thing the minister couldn't.
I mean, it really is just it's the ultimate modern paradox, you know?
It really is.
Because we live in this hyper-advanced, policy-driven, AI-integrated world, and yet the turning point for a room full of highly dysregulated kids comes down to, 12 very mundane instructions and a standard sheet of printer paper.
Right. And that paradox is exactly what we are unpacking in today's deep dive. We've got an incredibly revealing stack of sources for you today to help guide us through this.
Some really great stuff in there.
Yeah, first, there's a brilliant lecture from Professor Everett Marshall. It's called The Architecture Beneath the Architecture.
Fantastic lecture.
Then we have a beautifully illustrated, really ground-level storybook from Promptiverse Studios called 12 Instructions, which, it documents what actually happened in Mr. Julian's classroom.
It gives you that ground-level view.
Exactly. And to tie the macro and the micro together, we have this NotebookLM infographic that it visualizes how modern education systems are fundamentally built.
And that infographic is crucial because it basically splits the architecture of education into two distinct competing halves.
The roof and the foundation.
Right. If we really want to understand why the minister's approach and Mr. Julian's approach clashed so spectacularly on that Tuesday morning, we have to look at the blueprints of the roof first.
Okay, so the infographic labels this roof the compliance architecture, and looking at the visualization, it is just this heavy top-down institutional structure.
Yeah.
It basically treats education like an industrial delivery mechanism. Professor Marshall's lecture actually refers to it as a pylon, right?
Yeah, a pylon or a pipeline, just a rigid system designed to route traffic and, deliver measurable outcomes as efficiently as possible. And every roof needs support beams, right? Right. And the load-bearing wall holding this specific one up is financial accountability. The system relies heavily on CEO-style governance, strict attendance targets, and standardized testing.
Those are its unbending indicators of success.
Exactly. And guarding all of this is what the infographic calls the EQAO metric shield. Basically, if you hit your provincial testing numbers, the shield holds and the institution is deemed a success.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Sure.
Because I'm looking at this corporate pipeline model, and part of me really wants to push back on the critique.
Okay, play devil's advocate.
Isn't this roof basically just the institutional equivalent of making kids eat their vegetables?
Right.
Nobody likes doing it, but financial oversight actually matters.
It does.
Attendance matters. You can't run a massive public system on, good vibes in theory, You have to manage public funds responsibly.
Yeah.
So are we being too harsh on this compliance architecture just because it's completely unromantic?
Well, that is a vital distinction to make, and Professor Marshall concedes that exact point in his lecture.
Oh, he does?
Yeah, he says the legislation isn't inherently malicious. You absolutely need a roof to keep the rain out, obviously.
Right.
But what's fascinating here is the problem isn't the existence of the roof. The problem is that a roof is completely blind to the internal psychological journey of the student standing underneath it.
Because a metric shield can't measure a human emotion.
Exactly. That's the crux of the issue. A compliance architecture doesn't ask, does this child belong here? It asks, is this school board meeting its quarterly targets?
Yeah, totally different questions.
It frames student success purely through compliance checkpoints. You can mandate that a child sits in a chair at 9 a.m., but you cannot mandate engagement.
Right.
You certainly can't administer the precise psychological moment a student feels safe enough to drop their emotional guard and actually learn something.
And think about that in your own life for a second. Have you ever worked a job where you hit every single KPI, you showed up on time every day, your boss was perfectly happy?
Oh, yeah.
But you felt completely isolated and miserable.
Absolutely.
You met the compliance metrics, but you had zero sense of belonging.
Yeah.
That's what's happening under the roof. The document has no metric for a kid feeling safe.
Which leads us directly to the bottom half of the infographic, the foundation, the bedrock.
Got it.
If the roof is the compliance architecture, the foundation is the belonging threshold. And unlike the roof, which is, dropped down from above by policy mandates, the foundation can only be constructed relationally.
Right, from the ground up.
From the ground up. The visual in the infographic shifts entirely here. It's no longer the sterile pipeline. It's a picture of heavy wooden desks being physically pushed into a circle.
And since you obviously cannot legislate a circle of desks from a political office at Queen's Park, we have to look at how that foundation is actually built in the wild.
Right.
That brings us back to the ground-level details, which, if you follow the legacy of investigative field reporting like we used to see on VPTV, that's where the real truth always hides.
Always.
Let's get into the 12 Instructions Storybook and the reality of Mr. Julian's classroom.
So to build that foundation, Professor Marshall outlines 4 distinct beams, what he calls the 4 pillars of sovereignty.
The 4 pillars of sovereignty.
Yeah. These are the psychological phases a student must move through. The first is infrastructure, or the room.
The room.
This is the transition from what he calls a terrarium of surveillance.
Well, that's a great phrase.
Isn't it? Think of the blinking red eyes of security cameras and the isolating blue glow of tablets, moving from that into a place of actual physical and emotional safety.
Because, you can't focus on algebra if your nervous system is in fight or flight mode.
That is the exact psychological mechanism at play. And once the nervous system settles, we reach the second pillar, identity, symbolized by the streetcar. This represents recognizing a student's sovereign knowledge.
Sovereign knowledge.
Yeah. The unique, irreplaceable lived experiences they bring with them on their morning commute to that room.
Right. And then comes the third pillar, agency.
Yeah.
Represented by the ruler.
Yes.
And this isn't some abstract concept. It's about putting actual physical tools and clear instructions into a student's hands so they can take control of their immediate environment.
Exactly.
Which means the fourth and final pillar has to be the execution.
Right.
If they have the safe room, their identity is recognized, and they have the tools in their hands.
The only thing left is taking ownership of the work itself. Sovereignty, the poem. It is the final stage where a student looks at what they've created and claims it as all me.
All me.
They transition from being a passive, compliant participant in the Roof's pipeline to being an active, sovereign human being. And Professor Marshall actually philosophically links this progression to Joseph Campbell's hero's journey.
Oh, the classic monomyth, like a hero venturing into the unknown, facing trials, transforming.
Yeah. The threshold of learning requires a mentor and a crossing point. In the storybook, there's this beautiful, almost cinematic moment where a student named Maya appears at the door. She's framed by golden morning light, and she crosses into the newly formed circle of desks.
Wow.
That physical step into the circle is a threshold crossing that a massive policy document simply cannot detect or quantify.
Okay, I hear the poetry in that, I do. But I have to play skeptic again here.
Go for it.
Isn't applying Joseph Campbell's epic monomyth to a Tuesday afternoon grade 6 class a bit, grandiose?
How so?
Well, how does a 12-year-old kid fighting with a Chromebook equate to slaying a dragon?
Well, it sounds abstract until you translate the myth into developmental psychology. Like, explain it like I'm 5.
Okay.
The myth isn't literally about dragons. It's about navigating chaos. For a 12-year-old, especially in a room with a high newcomer population where they might not even speak the dominant language well, simply walking through that classroom door is stepping into the terrifying unknown.
Because they're overwhelmed.
Completely. Their cognitive load is completely maxed out.
So when Mr. Julian walks in as a substitute teacher, the room is dysregulated because they are all just drowning in that chaos.
Right.
Like, the regular teacher is out, support staff are absent, kids are streaming music on headphones to tune out, and the lesson plan left on the desk is literally for opioids and addiction.
Yeah, it's a recipe for a total meltdown.
And this is where we see the psychology of the foundation in action. Mr. Julian doesn't yell over the noise.
He doesn't.
He doesn't demand compliance or point to the rules. Instead, he shrinks their chaotic universe down to something they can actually manage.
He sets the wrong lesson plan aside, ignores the glowing tablets, and he holds up a single blank piece of paper in portrait orientation.
Yes.
And he gives 12 incredibly boring, precise instructions.
Right. Title at the top, a rectangle drawn with a ruler.
An illustration inside.
A definition below, your name on the back. And the character trait for the month, cooperation.
And from a cognitive standpoint, those instructions are a lifeline.
Yeah.
When a child's brain is flooded with cortisol and dysregulation, a blank piece of paper and a wooden ruler provide absolute, predictable boundaries.
Like that sanctuary.
Exactly. He is giving them a small 8 by 11-inch world they can entirely master. He tells Priya to hand out rulers from a silver can. He asks Philip to pass out pencils from a blue tray.
He is literally handing them the third pillar.
Agency. Yes.
And the visual payoff in this storybook is stunning. Once the students realize they have clear, safe boundaries, the chaos just evaporates.
It does.
The glowing Chromebooks start to snap shut one by one. The book describes it like a row of small blue doors closing.
I love that line.
It's beautiful. The dysregulated room suddenly levels out. That analog blank piece of paper ends up teaching the concept of cooperation better than any digital module ever could.
Which introduces a massive point of friction for modern education, right? Because that physical analog reality, the success of a simple piece of paper, it forces us to confront the digital reality of the Babbage Prism.
Right, the Babbage Prism. For those unfamiliar with the term from our sources, the Babbage Prism is the overarching AI infrastructure designed to monitor, anticipate, and measure student learning.
It's the ultimate high-tech manifestation of the roof.
Exactly. And if the blank paper works, because it requires the student to project their own human identity onto it, what happens when we introduce AI? Like a machine that can just generate the rectangle, the illustration, and the definition for them in 2 seconds.
Well, to answer that, we turn to the field report from senior correspondent Sophia Isabella at the AI Learning Lab. She documents interactions with students using these advanced models, including a grade 8 student named Leo and a really profound reflection from a student named Sarah.
Yeah, Sarah.
Yeah.
She describes the exact texture of a streetcar ride she took at 7:43 a.m.
She talks about the morning light filtering through the fingerprinted glass of the streetcar doors.
And that very specific, aching loneliness of arriving somewhere new and not yet belonging to it.
Yeah.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Sophia Isabella points out that a Babbage Prism AI can summarize the entire history of public transit.
Oh, absolutely.
It can process the geolocation data of the streetcar, but it cannot know what that fingerprinted glass actually feels like.
It cannot know the texture of a human arrival. That lived sensory experience is what the lab calls sovereign knowledge.
Sovereign knowledge.
It lives exclusively in the student. It does not and it cannot live in the machine.
So if an AI can't understand the fundamental human experience of feeling isolated on a morning commute, what is it actually good for in a classroom?
It's a fair question.
Are we supposed to just like smash the Babbage prisms, throw out all the tech, and use blank paper for the next century?
Yeah, no, not at all. And to resolve that tension, Professor Marshall synthesizes 3 global signals that emerged the exact same week as Mr. Julian's class.
Okay.
They revolve around one central defining question. Who gets to define belonging?
Okay, let's look at the first signal. It comes out of Beijing from a World Internet Conference report on youth and technology.
Right.
In their national strategy, belonging is assigned by the state. You belong because you are part of a massive collective purpose, the grand arc of national rejuvenation.
And I mean, it's an incredibly powerful unifying vision.
Yeah.
But applying the hero's journey lens, a journey that is entirely defined and assigned before the hero even takes their first step.
Isn't it a journey at all?
Exactly. It's not a true journey. It is a pre-scripted pageant. The student has no individual sovereignty.
Okay. Then we have the second signal, Ontario. This is the institutional policy, the massive roof we dissected earlier. Yes. Under this system, belonging is administered as a compliance checkpoint.
Right.
You belong if your attendance metrics are green and your test scores hit the baseline. You are just a widget fitting into the system designed to receive you.
But as we've established, you cannot administer a threshold crossing. A spreadsheet cannot tell you if a child feels safe.
It just can't.
Which brings us to the third and final signal, the Laboratory of Belonging in Toronto, Mr. Julian's classroom.
Right. In this third model, belonging isn't assigned by a government, and it isn't administered by a spreadsheet. It is claimed.
Claimed by the sovereign student.
Yeah. It's constructed relationally from the ground up by a human mentor who understands that before you can teach a kid anything, they have to feel like they belong in the room.
It goes back to the idea of the human handshake. No matter how advanced our networks become, human connection is the underlying architecture of learning.
That actually reminds me of the evolution of the TSMN Global Student Network mentioned in the sources. The whole premise of the Student Mentor Network was built on that exact concept. That true global connection wasn't about the fiber optic cables. It was about the literal human handshakes happening across borders.
Yeah, the technology was just the wire.
The handshake was the actual connection.
That is the perfect metaphor to bring this all together. We have the minister building the vast bureaucratic roof, and we have Mr. Julian quietly laying the foundation with a pencil and paper.
Yeah.
To synthesize all of this, Professor Marshall lands his lecture on a quote from the poet T.S. Eliot.
Okay.
At the still point of the turning world, there the dances.
The still point of the turning world. Wow. I mean, think about how much was violently turning on the morning of April 13th, 2026.
So much.
You had a federal election campaign promising sweeping AI for all. You had the provincial legislature tabling massive CEO governance structures. You had hundreds of AI education bills churning through state legislatures globally.
The policy apparatus never stops turning?
But the still point is Mr. Julian. The still point is a human teacher standing in a room, reading the chaotic energy of 26 students and offering them safety.
It's the blank piece of paper, the ruler, the 12 simple instructions. That is what sovereign teaching looks like.
And that beautifully answers the question about the role of technology. Sovereign teaching isn't at war with AI.
No.
It's the vital condition that makes AI useful in the first place.
That is the ultimate synthesis. If we connect this to the bigger picture, Professor Marshall's resounding takeaway is this: AI for all means nothing without belonging for each.
I'm going to repeat that because it is so foundational. AI for all means nothing without belonging for each.
Because without the foundation of belonging, a hyper-advanced tool like the Babbage Prism just bounces right off the student's emotional armor.
Right.
But when a student feels safe, when they lower that shield, claim their sovereignty, and say, "That poem, I wrote that, that's all me," then the tools, whether it's a wooden ruler or a cutting-edge AI, they become profound instruments of their agency.
So what does this all mean for you listening to this deep dive right now?
Good question.
Take a moment today to evaluate the roofs and foundations in your own life. Think about your workplace, your community, your family dynamics. Are you letting institutions administer your sense of belonging through their metrics?
Are you just showing up, meeting your attendance targets, and playing a pre-assigned role?
Or are you finding your own still point, claiming your own sovereignty, and writing your own poem?
It is the structural threshold that determines whether a person can truly stand upright in their life. The roof might keep the rain off your head, but the foundation is the only thing you can actually stand on.
And that leaves us with one final provocative thought to mull over.
Okay.
If true agency is that quiet, steady moment when a human being lowers their shield, looks at their work and says, "That's all me."
Yeah.
What happens to our human agency when we eventually build AI systems designed to predict our need for belonging before we even step onto the streetcar?
That's the real question.
Will those predictive systems actually build our foundations for us? Or will they just become another invisible roof we're trapped under?
Something we will all have to navigate very soon.
We'll leave you to think on that. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.